Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, sedati sedati, thank you very much for your attention. This is a panel on new technologies and the new geopolitics of energy.
Wow.
I have to make an immediate confession. What is my qualification for being here? I am not a technologist. I am not a scientist. So my only real qualification for being here is that I am, or that my wife sometimes disagrees, but I am a human being. Therefore, I do have a vested interest in what is happening to our planet and to its energy future. And also, of course, as a human being, I consume energy. So I am part of the problem. I hope that this panel will be part of the solution. And I'm sure it's a very distinguished panel. Friedbert Blücher here, he gave a brilliant panel yesterday on rare earth resources. And also, you clashed with, well, clash is too strong a word perhaps, but you had an interchange with Laurent Fabius at dinner last night. We have Frank-Sylvain Schreiber from Switzerland, we have Nicolas Pial from France, and we have Frank Oblitz, who is going to be our first speaker. I confess that you're going to be talking about, I think, about hybrid solutions for energy. I still have a car with an internal combustion energy. I hope you can persuade me that the time is now to get an electric vehicle. The floor or the chair is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this stage. I have a short presentation. I would like to show you a new way of thinking. So the world's first climate positive energy carrier. And I call this A-Fuel. So I'm Frank Robles, I'm the founder of the company, and we are located in Austria and Germany. This unique building here is our headquarters in Germany, and has a unique history. In the midst of the 1960s, this was the center of the world, only for the automotive industry, but it was. And so we are working also for John, bringing electrified solutions also to the average people on Earth. And we showed with this car, the first car worldwide who is able to have a positive impact on the climate. And we showed this also to Mr. Gerd Müller, the new General Secretary of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. We have a lot of support from him. We are also proud that the government in Germany supported us and ordered already 10 of these cars to promote also the technology inside Europe and Brussels. Yeah, and this will start beginning of next year. And why we are doing this? It is unbelievable that we as humankind released during the last mostly 70 years, such an amount of fossil carbon in the air that this equivalent would be a mountain of carbon of around 7,000 meters. And that's really impressive. That gives you an impression how deep has to be a hole to get all of this stuff rid of. Compared to this beautiful mountain, the Mountain Fuji, it's really a tough stuff. And it's only about carbon, is the one important information. And the second one is we have to remove this all. And why we have to remove it, this slide is showing, or is looking back 800,000 years. And since this time, humankind is on this planet, and we had never, ever the possibility to destroy our Earth. But we are the first generation, we are doing this. So from around the 50s in the last century, we increased our CO2 emissions from 300 ppm to 421, and it rises up like hell. And the good news in this picture is, if we do have a technology to reduce the amount of carbon, the fossil carbon, also the CO2 in the air, we can get rid of this problem. And here is shown, yes, there is an opportunity to reduce it as fast as we have released it. And I'll show you in the next slides how does it work. Yeah, and one of the important information is Paris Agreement is by far, really by far not enough, and is sometimes, in my opinion, also blocking our minds for the real targets we have to achieve. And yeah, the second thing is we have already technology available to reverse this climate problem. So how does it work? And let's have a look on the right-hand side of this picture. We are here in Abu Dhabi, so in the desert. And when you look here, it is clear that only renewable energy is able to bring us forward in this matter. But renewable energy out of a power plant like photovoltaic is not transportable. This is a big problem. It's not, to create a liquefied thing and becoming a transportable, storable solution, we have to split water to hydrogen, so creating green hydrogen, combining it with CO2 out of the atmosphere, it's important, and then it creates methanol. I call this methanol because it's 100% pure out of the atmosphere. And now, if you look at the picture, so this methanol will become the next global energy carrier for all of us. And this is important because we have to reduce the fossil content we are using. And combining now this methanol with an active C-sink, this creates, we call this fuel, so the atmospheric fuel. And the C-sink is an active process, so some of the energy coming out of the photovoltaic will be used to split the carbon dioxide into carbon and oxygen, and the carbon, as black coal, has to get back under the ground, and therefore I show this here in the reverse mountain going down under the ground. And the important information is that from the perspective of GDP, only 3% of the GDP is necessary to create this new global energy carrier, and only 3% of GDP is necessary to get rid of the old problems. And the reason is the basic energy is so cheap. So we have to spread out this information, and I'm lucky to be here, to all the people on Earth, to know them, to green funds to support us, because it's really a big thing, to the politicians, to regulators, to implement also this knowledge, and companies to realize this. So I'm really proud about being a part of this biggest transaction worldwide, also in human history. So be proud too. So let's realize this as fast as possible also in this area, in this region here. This is perfect also here in Abu Dhabi. Yes, it's also perfect in Egypt, in Namibia, Chile, Australia. And that's the new good information. There are a lot of other countries available to support the new global energy carrier. Yeah. And this is, for this region, even important because this technology is not for the next 10 years. It's for centuries, for 200, 300,000 years from now on. And that's the beauty of this technology. So to create a real great future for humankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Just a quick question. This sounds wonderful in theory. Politicians, of course, always have a very short time span because of the electoral cycle in democracies. What's your time span on this? I mean, you've got something which will last for centuries, but what's your timetable?
I have already a good information. I have signed a letter of intent for the Emirates that such a plant would be installed until 2027 and a large plant until 2030. So it's still some years to go, but these buildings or these plants are huge. But we have to think until 2050 and then beyond.
Yeah.
What is coming in 2100? I think this is the target of this presentation.
Well, I think we have someone next who is equally a visionary, Franklin Silverschreiber. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for the clicker.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. And I had a presentation too. Thank you for being here. I'm Franklin Silverschreiber. I'm the co-founder and president of Transmutex. It's a Swiss-based company. It's a spin-off of CERN. And I'm here to discuss the important role of nuclear energy and then to give you a small idea of what we do. Okay. So where we are today is fossil against renewable, should be better said carbon against carbon-free. But the gap is enormous, and it hasn't really changed. I looked at the statistics from 1979 to today, and basically gas replaced coal, but renewables are almost nowhere to be seen except for hydroelectric power. I just want to state that today in Switzerland, nuclear is producing more energy than hydroelectric in winter, and nuclear is producing more electricity today than wind in Germany, for all the talk about wind. Today, in winter, not every day. If we want to understand the power of scalability for nuclear, this is what you have. You have a beautiful experiment in France versus Germany. France, in the 70s and 80s, over a 10-year period, invested approximately the same amount as Germany did over the last 10 years in renewables. Same amount of money, same amount of time. And the end result is 2 times more carbon-free energy for France that will last 60 to 80 years when you have to reinstall solar panels or wind turbines every 25 years. This is the power of nuclear. And in the summer of last year, and I didn't do it this year because it would be very unfavorable to Germany, so this is a favorable number for Germany. This was on the summer solstice of last year where you had as much sun in France and Germany. You could see that for all the renewables that were installed in Germany for the last 10 years, you had 6 times more CO2 per kilowatt hour in Germany than in France. So what do we want? Energy security, of course, but also reducing CO2. It is very clear that for energy security, nuclear is more scalable, and for CO2 reduction, nuclear is more scalable. There is no contest. And just to make it very clear, we went from medieval times to industrial times with a 2x gain in energy density from wood to coal. Wood, coal, 2x. Wind and solar are 10 times less energy dense than coal. Nuclear is 3 million times more energy dense than coal. So I would like to go back to Frank. Let's stop talking about 2050, which is, whatever goal it is. What's important is the future of our civilization, and nuclear is the last frontier. It's the California of energy. We have to make it work. This is what we have to make it work. Let's not be afraid. Let's be engaged. We want to have a future for generation upon generations, not just until 2050. One of the things that you may not understand is that the energy transition is about heat. It's not about electricity. Electricity is the least important part of the consumption of energy. Here in the United Arab Emirates, it's about air conditioning, and that's pretty good because electricity can make air conditioning. But they still, even in the United Arab Emirates with all the sun, they have 2 nuclear plants, 2 nuclear reactors that were started. They have 2 more. And therefore, if the United Arab Emirates need nuclear, then we have to ask, what should Germany do? Because they don't have the sun that they have here. Okay. And you may notice that there is transport here, 30%. And this is what I believe hydrogen is going to be so important. Hydrogen is probably, to me, the most promising vector of energy that is going to be tradable. Electricity has a problem. It needs to be hardwired. You cannot trade electricity except for a very specific case of interconnected grid. For hydrogen is like oil. You can transport it. You can transform it. You can do many things with it. And nuclear is the best for hydrogen, to make low-cost hydrogen, because nuclear works all the time. All the time. So if you buy a $10 million electrolyzer, you want it to work all the time. You don't want it to work just 20% or 30% of the time with wind. Okay, so nuclear is great. I convinced you in 10 minutes, not even 5 minutes. But of course, we have safety and waste, and we shouldn't put it under the carpet. This is the problem. We have to face the problem. The problem is waste, to me. Major problem. Safety, in the end, when you look at safety, nuclear has been spectacular accident, but very little death compared. The worst, actually, technology in terms of deaths per kilowatt hour is hydroelectricity. Unfortunately, because in Bangladesh, one dam broke and killed 200,000 people. So the default solution for waste is to bury it, and this is to scale. I'm not sure if you can see the humans, but you're trying to build tunnels that are 5 meters high in diameter, 1 kilometer down in the ground. This is a major engineering feat. And it's going to be finite. You're not going to make 30 of them. You're going to make 1 because it's already going to be incredibly expensive. In fact, it is incredibly expensive. And the UK this year doubled its estimate of the cost it's going to be for them to bury the waste in England. And just for the numbers, England has 10 nuclear reactors. So it's going to be $60 billion to bury the waste. Lost money. Just you bury the waste, it's going to be there for 300,000 years, and it might threaten the water supply of future generations. In fact, nuclear waste is hopefully underfunded. You can see that Switzerland, which is probably the best case for funding, which with the money in the bank already, has 5 reactors, whereas America has 93. It's actually 100, but some are closed. So, you can see that America has 20 times the reactors than Switzerland, but only twice the amount of money, and it's not in the bank. It's just a line on the general budget. The nuclear industry, in my mind, is bankrupt already from the get-go if we don't deal with the waste. The liability for the waste in America, it's going to be maybe 500 billion. In France, it's not going to be 30, it's probably going to be 90. The Cour des Comptes in France said they don't know, they have no idea how much it's going to cost. So if we don't deal with the waste, we will miss out on the opportunity of our civilization to harness the best clean energy we, the world, the universe, provides us. And the UN states that if we want to reach net zero by 2050, basically we have to have 5 times more nuclear. 5 times more nuclear. This is a 2018 report. So how are we going to do 5 times more nuclear if we don't know how to deal with the waste, and it's already too expensive? This is the question I had. This led me to meet some amazing scientists at CERN in Switzerland, which had a completely different approach, totally outside of the nuclear industry, completely different approach to how we should run a nuclear reactor, combining a particle accelerator, which you can see on the left, together with a reactor and thorium, which is a very common fuel. I'm not going to explain in detail, but the principle is that if you stop the accelerator, then the reactor stops in 2 milliseconds. 2 milliseconds. This is not a paper. This is actually demonstrated. And we can reduce the amount of nuclear waste by 99%. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's totally solved, but it has been demonstrated, scientifically evaluated, credible, and we have the worldwide partnerships to do it, because if climate change is going to be solved, it's going to be solved together. Let's not do it as just one company. So we reached out. We reached out to everybody to collaborate with us, and we have some of the most prestigious laboratories in the world, and we are reaching out to more industries now to make this effort. So this is it, and I would like to leave you with this beautiful quote from the Nobel laureate Gérard Mourou in France, who never gives quote, but allowed me to state his marvelous thing, which is, this is scientifically proven, credible, and led by an exceptional team. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of quick questions, Franklin. In England at the moment, in Britain, there's a big dispute about whether wind farms should be onshore or kept offshore. But from what you're saying, basically, wind turbines it's a false promise. It's not going to work.
Well, it's a useful technology, but it is really a transition technology in my mind.
Yeah.
And you can see there is a study in Germany that the wind turbine offshore are much more efficient than the wind turbine onshore. It's 30% compared to 10%. So it's really quite useless in my mind to build onshore. You should build offshore.
Second question. This looks very attractive, this thorium reactor, I guess you call it. What's your time scale? I mean, the same question I asked Frank.
If we were at war, which in many ways I think we are, we would be 5 years. Right now it looks like 2032.
Right, okay, well, fingers crossed, that's only 10 years away. And there's a war in the meantime, which is an actual war, so really our fingers crossed. But of course, none of this is going to happen without money. So we turn to private equity. Nicolas Viard from Tilt Capital Markets.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I don't know if I'm part of the problem or the solution, but as a private equity investor. So hi everyone, very happy to be here. I think it's very thrilling to talk after Frank and Franklin, because they are solutions. I think we need to, and I think that's what you come to. Your two presentations come to the same issue. Let's deal with reality. I think reality starts with what you also mentioned at the very beginning, Franklin, is today 600 exajoules of primary energy consumption, 500 is oil, gas, and coal. And that's the very, very hard reality. Then you turn to electricity, which I agree is a part of the issue, not the part. By the way, in Europe, gas consumption is as large for power production as it is for industry applications. So really, heat is a large problem. If you turn to power, out of the, and I'm not going to bore you with too many figures, but out of the 27,000 terawatt hours globally, 20 are based on coal, and no, sorry, a bit less, 17 are based on coal and gas. So when yesterday, Laurent Fabius very rightly so said that probably in 2 to 3 years, renewables is going to overtake coal, it's actually in terms of capacity, not in terms of energy produced. And that's very, very different. So that's the reality. Now, the challenge is, and I think you both alluded to that, the challenge is, and you talked about energy density, the 3 industrial revolutions that we've undergone were all based on increased energy per capita. First one was indeed coal, roughly 20 megajoule per kilo, then oil and gas, 40, then nuclear, 80 terajoule per kilo. The real challenge that we are experiencing, and it's fundamental in the way we think the energy system, is that we are moving away from those energy-dense technologies to energy-undense technologies. And so it becomes not a matter of production, it becomes a matter of logistics and optimization. You have much more sun that comes to the earth, solar energy, sorry, that comes to the earth than any other form of energy. The problem is not whether you have the energy. The problem is how do you harness it? And then, of course, comes the issue of how do you harness it and use it adequately? Because if you want to have industrial application 24 hours a day, you're not going to be relying on sun solely. So, for example, you have batteries, storage technologies coming into play. Again, let's be clear. The energy density of a battery is 1 megajoule per kilogram on average. So it's 40 times lower than oil and gas. And so we need to understand that this challenge is massive. We had a system that was built on big energy dense production capacity, transportation, distribution, and consumption. And we're just making this totally explode. Now, what it means, and this is where I'm trying to and bear with me, it's a view. I'm going to give you a view of what I think how the technologies are going to transform that in sequence. First, and I think Laurent Fabius yesterday said something very important, we as an investor, we focus on the next 10 years. Because indeed, in the long term, we're all dead. So how do we get on the Paris Agreement trajectory in the next 10 years? And I think this is critical. On our side, we see 2 elements. First, you need to get rid of coal. And I'm going to get back to your point on nuclear, but we need to get rid of coal. Coal is 12 gigaton of CO2 every year. It's 20% of GHG emissions alone. We need to get rid of coal, and we're going to see the implications of that afterwards. Second, we need to get rid of methane fugitive emissions. And I'm just going to pause here. I'm not saying we need to get rid of gas, because I think gas is an element of transition, because if we want to get rid of coal in the absence of nuclear, which is basically developed in, at best, 15 years, we need gas as an energy transition vector. But fugitive emissions are roughly 350 million tons every year. That represents 20 gigaton of CO2 equivalent because of the short lifespan in the atmosphere. So CO2 is a stock problem. We need to reduce CO2. Methane is a flow problem. If we manage to reduce fugitive emissions, we immediately have a very strong impact in the next 10 years in terms of GHG emissions. Now the problem is, in the same time as we're developing all those great technologies, solar, wind, and I'm just coming back on your question, I think renewables is an absolute must. The issue is, I always used to take that example in the oil and gas. You don't drill in Switzerland because you don't have taxes. You drill in Norway, where taxes are 78%, because you have oil and gas. Same thing for me in renewables. You don't build renewables because you have tariffs. You don't build you build renewables because it makes energy sense, economic sense. So you build where you have resource. You do massive offshore when you're in the British Islands, in the northern part of Germany. You do solar when you're in Spain and Italy, and of course in Chile and other parts of the world. Here in the Middle East, do you really do solar massively in Germany? In my view, I don't think so. It can be a solution, but it's totally marginal. How do you replace that bulk power of coal and then gas? I think nuclear is certainly a solution. So small modular reactors, one of the main advantages of that is instead of developing a project, the main feature of this is that it's industrialized. So the big interest of small modular reactor is that you actually industrialize the reactor and then you set it up on process terms, I would say. Whereas any reactor that has been developed apart from the French nuclear program the last 4 years has been basically a project on its own. Then I think we need to, in terms of technologies, hydrogen and e-fuels are going to be absolutely critical, fully agree, and that should happen in the next 2 to 3 years. I think one issue I see with hydrogen, very high gravimetric density, so energy per kilogram, 3 times that of oil and gas, very low volumetric density, 1/3 of gas. So there's an issue of transportation, storage, etc., but it will certainly be part of the problem. In my view, much more for industrial application than pure energy, I would say pure energy production or fuel cells or whatever. And then I think there's one thing that must not be overlooked. It's how are we going to manage that from a power perspective on the grid. And on this, I would say the emerging technologies that we see are grid-enhancing technologies. So everything that will allow the grid, the system, to accommodate for larger share of intermittent renewable energy. And here you have a number of things that are being developed super interesting, from dynamic line rating, so basically looking really at the amount of energy that a line can transport according to weather conditions and according to the sagging of the line, etc. Power flow controls. So I'm not going to enter too much into that, but there are a number of technologies. These technologies are being developed, and they need to be developed right now. And then if we move to 2050, in my view, there is the big elephant in the room, which is nuclear fusion. And there are a lot of things going on right now. You may have seen the Series Bs of Commonwealth Fusion System, 1 billion. There are great companies in Europe, Renaissance Power. There's the ITER work that is extremely important to mature this industry. Now we'll just end here on one note on the geopolitics, because I think it's also the implication. And I will turn to 2 things. One is I would say solidarity, and the other one is integration. And when I say solidarity, I'm going to take an example that's probably a bit rough in the current situation. I'm going to talk about Russian gas. Of course, Russian gas is an issue. And yesterday I heard, the EU was short-sighted. No, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. I've been working in this industry for years. We knew that there was, we knew we were making a little bit of exposure to Russian gas. The issue is what choice did Europe have? I don't think we were short-sighted. I don't think the issue was Russian gas. The issue is Putin regime. The Gazprom delivered gas for 70 years without a hiccup, even when the Berlin Wall fell, even when the Soviet Union fell. So the issue is not Russian gas. The issue is a regime. And as a European, I don't think we should rejoice from cutting Russia from part of its revenues abruptly and having Russia in shambles at the doorstep of Europe. It's much easier for the US. They have oceans on each border. But I think from a geopolitical perspective, we need to work with Russia, not Putin. We need to work with Russia to see how we organize that transition. The second thing is integration. I think yesterday, Khaldoun Al-Mubarak said something very important on supply chains. Yes, we need to reindustrialize in different parts of the world. Because again, we need to have things that make sense locally. But we need to have trusted, I think he used the term, trusted supply chain. And I think it's very important. Today, the energy transition means that we are reorganizing all the supply chain and the exposures. How are we going to do that? Frankly, I don't really know. I know we have an issue of exposure to China on key materials, key pieces of equipment. This needs to be dealt with. It's not a defiance against China, it's just a reality. Now, to do that, we need to take account externalities that are social justice, environmental sustainability, etc. And I'm going to end on that note. I think what we are missing is that our investment models do a very poor job to actually account for those social and environmental externalities. And until we do that, I think we will have a difficulty coming up with sound and sustainable energy policies.
Thank you very much indeed, Nicolas. Mille merci. I'm very conscious of the time because the previous panels obviously went overboard a little bit, so we will, I think, probably try and steal a bit from lunch. I hope we won't be too hungry. But just one quick question before I ask Fleur to sum up. Nicolas, you say on your website that the energy transition in Europe is an investment market of about 500 billion euros a year. That's quite an impressive number. How much, I mean, it's a great target. How much of it is actually being reached?
Oh, we're very far from it.
I mean, are we at 10 billion or what? I mean,
we were 160 billion investment per year in 18. I think we went up to 200 billion, and we actually should be investing 600 billion.
So the failure is at the government level or actually the private sector?
No, I think the issue is that if you put 600 billion per year at and I'm going to be very blunt, at a 15% return on capital employed, I mean, the costs are going through the roof. And I think we need to understand that the real gain that we're having from that is also, again, externality. If we're trying to price in the same way as we've priced before, we are going to have problem because the cost of energy is going to be unsustainable in Europe and elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like now to ask Flüger to sum up what you've heard. I mean, you've from the Europe, I'm never sure whether it's the European cluster or the European center. It seems to have both words on the internet. Is it the cluster for climate, energy and resource security or the center? Either way, you're the expert. So over to you.
Well, that doesn't matter. Thank you, John. In your introduction, you referred to this little argument I had yesterday evening with Prime Minister Fabius.
It was a very polite argument.
And, well, I believe that in one basic line he was entirely right. And that was when he said there is a huge gap between our pronouncements on more and more ambitious energy or CO2 reduction goals on the one hand, and our ability to concretely deliver. And I believe that this is the most difficult thing we have to solve in the near future. I would even go further and say the loudness of our proclamations of ambitious goals is inversely proportional to our ability to really reduce carbon emissions. And that is a situation where you will soon see a tipping point that people either do not take these aims serious anymore, or they become radicalized because they say, well, the politicians are not able to live up to their own goals. And then they radicalize like we see it in some of our countries. So what can we do in this situation? I think we have embarked on a wrong path, and that path is goals and government micromanagement, is forbidding certain technologies, is interfering in markets, that will not go nowhere. What we have to do is to unleash technologies, and there we are. Unleash technologies, bring them to the market, and trust that humans are able to live up to dangers and threats and challenges, not by forbidding anything, not by fleeing away, but by grabbing the chances. And here we saw wonderful, revolutionary models. I mean, I don't know if you really got the basic message of Frank Obrist. He says, climate neutral is not enough. We have to become climate negative in our thinking. We have to get the carbon again out of the atmosphere. And he showed with his prototype of this A-fuel car that this is already possible with our technologies that we have, and that you can use countries like Abu Dhabi or Saudi Arabia or Morocco or Australia perfectly for this, to create a coal sink, a carbon sink. And that is, in my point of view, a great message that he has. And not a message for 500 years. I would never say that. I would say it's a message for the next 50 years where we really can do a huge difference to the planet.
You are from Germany, and Germany famously, after Fukushima, decided to end its nuclear industry. What was the message of that? I mean, in the end, you're living in the reality of a political world as well.
May I say, I must admit that I was never a fan of nuclear, because I never trusted the ability of mankind to store high radiation used nuclear fuels for millions of years. But since I know, and that's the next technological revolution, since I know that it is possible to reuse these fuels, work with them in the way of transmutation and partition, reduce the radiation of them so that if you store something at the end, you only have to store it for 200-300 years instead of 1,000,000 years. That is something where I believe we should have a second look to nuclear, especially when it comes to small nuclear reactors, to a new generation of secure nuclear reactors. So I believe the German policy has a lot of sense 10, 15, 20 years ago. It doesn't make sense today where we have new technologies. And for instance, my government in Germany, they say, well, final storage in Germany will be possible. We will find the place between 2045 and 2069. Then it will need another 20 years until we have built the storage. And it will take another 20 years until all the used fuels are stored there. So at the beginning of next century, we will end this work on our nuclear heritage. This is crazy. This is a hybris. Man cannot make decisions today for 100 years, and he is much more realistic with his 2030 or 2032. And we should look to those things and not forbid them as governments in Europe, and especially in my country, do. So we have so many chances, and let me add one more, and that comes to this. Also, it could be based here, and that is synthetic fuels for airplanes, for ships, but also for the individual traffic, with e-fuels, with A-fuels. That is a huge chance. And we should not say today, 35, no combustion engines anymore. We should say 35, no combustion engines which are based on fossil fuels. Yeah. But if you have them with synthetic fuels, green fuels, why not then use the combustion engine? It's not the engine that is bad, it's the fuel that is bad for the climate. So in my point of view, we have to unleash this technological revolution like the US does with the IRA. And that's my final statement. I believe that we had a lot of competition on energy sources in the past. Who has the oil? Who has the gas? In the future, we will have a competition on the climate technologies. Who is best in producing hydrogen? Who is best to distribute it? To be able to have the logistics, the storage systems. So the competition of tomorrow, today and tomorrow, is on technology. And in the moment we have understood that these are the solutions and not the politicians in Sharm el-Sheikh, that's also nice, but it's not the solution, then I think we have a great chance to fight.
Thank you very much. This is a wonderful finishing comment. We are really pushing for time, but let me just see if there are some questions from the audience. Yes, Mr. Treat from Israel. The microphone working? No. Can you try to make the microphone alive as opposed to asleep?
Why don't you try to speak out loudly?
I think another microphone will come. Here we are.
What? No? Oh,
no.
yes.
There we go.
Thank you. I want to make a comment and a question. A comment is that I want to tell Mr. Fredberg that today there is no need for burying all these nuclear remains. There is today technology which can really deal with it without burying it. So it exists. It's working in the United States and different other places. So we can read of this let's say, junk of the atomic nuclear power stations without burying it. Secondly, I would like to ask Mr. Pion about what do you think the chances to have in the future, a cold fusion. That would change everything. If we have a possibility to arrive to cold fusion, then you have energy as much as you want without any remains. Thank you.
That would be the magic grail, absolutely. Another question? Yes, gentleman here at the front.
John, over there.
Oh, Mr. Narayam first, and then...
Okay.
Yes.
This was a very interesting session, I must say, and I'm very thankful to. I used to be a member of the Indian Atomic Energy Commission. I also played a role in the India-US nuclear deal. My question is actually to Mr. Servan Schreiber, because now I'm engaged in a thing to bring back the nuclear debate into India, because energy is one of our problems. How reliable is what you have said? Because I would like to know, and hopefully after this I'll have a further conversation with you, is it possible to really use this in a commercial way? Or is it still a pie in the sky at the moment? I understood what you said, but is a realistic one, because in my lifetime, I don't have too many years left, but I would like to see whether we can push it together. At the moment in India, I have a certain amount of traction still possible. So I would like to have a very honest and realistic assessment as to whether this is possible. And you hear so much about HALEU, thorium, new reactors and all that coming up. Does all this underwrite what you're trying to say? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a final question here. Gentleman with the beard.
In addition to what Honorable Narayanan sir has said, my crux question is that is thorium is really viable solution, Franklin, a question for you. And a comment is that if there is a viable solution, then please share that under the technology transfer. Thank you very much.
Okay. And a final question from Mohammed there.
Merci. Alors, c'est une question qui aurait pu être posée aussi dans le l'atelier sur les minerais. Alors, évidemment qu'il y a plusieurs types de technologies, mais certaines sont utilisatrices de minerais rares. Et un certain nombre d'analystes relèvent que si l'on devait convertir le parc électrique, le parc véhicule en Angleterre en électricité, il faudrait 2 fois la production mondiale de cobalt, 3/4 de la production mondiale de lithium, la moitié de la production mondiale de cuivre. Évidemment, je parle que du parc de l'Angleterre. Ça, c'est une équipe de chercheurs au muséum qui en parle. Et évidemment, la remarque, c'est qu'il n'y aura jamais assez de mines pour que la Chine, les États-Unis, l'Union européenne, la Russie rendent leurs véhicules électriques, gèrent le big data, la constellation des satellites, l'industrie d'armement. Alors la remarque aussi importante, c'est qu'une mine de cuivre peut consommer jusqu'à 40 millions de mètres cubes d'eau. Or, les 6 plus grandes entreprises mondiales exploitent leurs mines dans des zones qui se caractérisent par des manques d'eau. Alors, quand on envisage les questions technologiques, est-ce que ces politiques sont prises en compte? Est-ce que ces financements sont orientés? Est-ce que ce débat est organisé? Merci.
Merci, Mohamed. C'est une question très, très pertinente, en fait. I think there may definitely be more questions, but I want to stop there because we really are running out of time. So we have questions. Thorium, nuclear, and rare earths.
I think,
and I think that was more or less, unless I've forgotten something. Who wants to tackle that? Let's go, Franklin.
I can.
Is your thorium pipe dream in the end?
First of all, yeah, well, it's a great question because, you know, I was skeptical. So this was not my idea. It's somebody else's idea. I just stumbled upon it, and I looked at it for almost 2 years before I jumped into this because I had a lot of experts tell me that it was viable. So yes, I can assure you that we have a very solid basis, that it's way beyond the research stage. We're in the engineering stage. It's just a different way to look at it. So yes, we are credible. And that's why we have those partners. Otherwise, they wouldn't come. And I just want to say one thing about fusion before, I think, Friedberg, you want to talk about fusion too. But, you know, something that I learned on my own, I had never read it anywhere. Fusion doesn't happen on Earth. Just doesn't happen on Earth. Doesn't happen in the stratosphere, in the atmosphere, on the surface, in the ground, in the core. Doesn't happen. Happens in the sun.
Yeah.
And the sun is 1 million times bigger than the Earth. And it happens because you have heat and gravity pressure. So to replace gravity from the sun just with extra heat is not, to me, self-evident. I'm not sure this will ever, and I know I'm going against a lot of common wisdom, I'm not sure this will ever produce positive energy. How much energy you put into how much energy you put out. That's my only way to say we should focus on what we know works because we're in the urgency.
And that's coming from someone living by sand. So it's interesting. So it's really fusion that is the complete pipe dream. Friedbert or Nicolas?
I think Nicolas first, huh?
Okay, perfect.
And very briefly, please.
Yeah, maybe I'm just going to try to attempt to answer your comment at least on you know, minerals, etc. I think you're right. There's no other way to say it that no, we don't know how to organize a system without creating entropy. And so we are replacing in one, which was CO2 and GHG emissions, with another one, which is how are you going to sustainably mine all those materials. Yes, it will be an issue. I think, again, we're going to have to work on efficiency. We can't have the same amount of energy per capita that we had in the past. So we're going to have to work on efficiency. Recycling, circular economy is critical. And I think in that sense, both what Franklin and Frank are doing is critical. And this is the reason why I was saying, if we don't adapt our models, our investment models, to integrate externalities, we will never get it. I am fairly certain of that. And our model today are ill-designed for this because financial theory does not take into account externalities.
Frank, any comment on, I mean, you've got a real compliment from Friedbert, I think Friedbert is basically one of nature's natural skeptics in a way. He's a realist, but he was very praiseworthy of your, what is it, A-fuel, I suppose one could call it. Perhaps you have the solution. Given that transportation is really the biggest single contributor to climate change at the moment.
Now, I tried to show with the presentation the global perspective so that we have the ability and we could be proud about our technology. It's photovoltaic, has a huge efficiency, and such a plant is in the end 50 times more efficient than a regular forest. And so we can really create our future, a real future for humankind. And I think it's wonderful to present this also and motivate also financing guys, companies who create to create the biggest business ever on this earth. And I think it's a positive
Thank you. Friedbert, I'm going to give you the final 30 seconds. I've just described you as a natural skeptic, which you're probably not. I mean, you may be a dreamer, I don't know. But are you feeling, I mean, this panel I think has been fascinating. Does it make you feel actually optimistic or
I'm
not sure?
Absolutely optimistic if we unleash the powers of technology. And let me give you a little story. In 30 seconds, I hope. A German bestseller in 1922, the bestseller of all in that time, of a guy called Kellermann, and it's called The Tunnel. And it's about technology giving the possibility to pave a tunnel, to dig a tunnel between Europe and the United States. We had no planes, and at that time this was revolutionary, and they went for it. And they financed it, and it took them 25 years. Very difficult process. And at the end of this, they had a big celebration in Europe with all the trains coming, and suddenly they saw a plane. So in these 25 years, technological revolutions had happened which people could not foresee 25 years ago. And therefore, my main point, sir, is not, is it viable? We cannot decide about this.
No.
I think it makes a lot of sense what has been said here. But we should be open to these new technologies and not just say, well, we have solar and we have wind and that's it. No, there is so much more going around, and we should have an open eye and an open heart and an open brain for that.
Thank you very much, Sheila. I must say, at the very beginning, I claimed to be a human being. And I think the great thing about human beings is that, the real quality of the human species is that it has the ability to create and to think. So I think this has been a fascinating panel. Thank you so much. I think you deserve a huge round of applause. Thank you.